Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation. I'm Herb Ricardo with Alicia Vassar and Rich Grego. And today we've got a wonderful guest, Vicky Russ. Vicky Russ is going to go ahead and talk to us a little bit. Actually, she's going to school us on work and life balance. So we're going to hear a lot about that. And I know everyone seems to be thinking about this idea of work and life balance and stress in the workplace and how do we make our lives a little bit more meaningful. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Vicky and just kind of give us a little overview and see where we go. Vicky, welcome.
Sure. Hi, thanks. It's really exciting to be here. Um, yeah, so if I just give you a bit of background, I have spent 30 plus years in public sector corporate services, working across health, education, public, local government, delivering leisure services. And over the course of that career, it's all been management centered and operational management, strategic development, business development, marketing, etc. But I've in recently worked in the mental health sector, and I quickly realized that was my calling, and that's where I wanted to be. I'd found my life purpose, and I looked back as you do and thought maybe that explains why my career, on the face of it, when people read my CV, they think, gosh, she's jumped around a lot. But I always thought, well, that's because my core profession is management. And if you're a good manager, you can manage most things. But what I've noticed was the common thread was public service. And and that's what was drawing me all the time into those different sectors was the need to do something good for the wider community, for society. Um, I've always had this strong sense of, sort of social responsibility and and also a firm belief in people that when you put people together, then you get them working together as teams. There's no end to what they can achieve. And I get genuinely excited about seeing how people can just create novel things and break barriers by working together and just having that vision and imagination. But being in an environment where that can thrive is difficult. And over the last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time in the transformation space, um, trying to deliver complex change. And it really opened my eyes to the cultural influence of achieving those ambitions and the need to set up your environment. And you can set up the environment so that that creativity and curiosity and psychological safety will enable people to achieve those amazing end results. And never has it been more important. I mean, certainly in the UK, our health services are really under pressure at the moment, in particular, and we must find a way of getting our cultures more congruent with the individuals that work in them so that they can do their jobs properly and continue to do those jobs because otherwise what we're seeing is people are leaving, people are burning out and leaving and getting frustrated, they're not able to do what they want to do or have a real passion to do, often because the organization isn't set up to facilitate them and support them to do it. So that's why I set up my coaching business because I want to target those professionals in particular because they are so vital for our communities and society. And we cannot afford for them to be burning out and leaving their professions prematurely. And also, with all of these stories of people burning out and leaving, new entrants aren't coming into those professions either. So I'm on a mission to protect the protectors. That's my sort of mission statement for my new little business. and it's small, but hopefully will have targeted impact.
Great, great. Again, so much, and the history of your environments, the work environments, your personal environments. Obviously, I can feel they've all come into this place where you feel really comfortable. And one of the things that
Yeah.
you talk about, which I think is so vital, is the alignment that an individual aligns themselves with their particular values and passions with the one of the organization, right?
Mm,
So as
mm,
long as the way that you think and the way that you feel and what you believe is the right way to behave, the right way to work, as long as that's in line with the organization that you're working with, then that level of, again, congruency, productivity happens. You almost feel like you're not going into work because you're doing the things that you believe that you want to do, right? And that's what
absolutely.
you're trying to get individuals to find that connection.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then they connect with each other at work, and then there's no end to what they can achieve. But what I have found in the NHS in particular is that they're culturally not necessarily aligned to the individuals that are working in them, ironically. And I think some of that could be down to its legacy, its history, how it was set up. It was set up very much on a military model.
Hmm.
It's very hierarchical. It's very uh, people are trained in their particular disciplines, and quality is governed by everyone doing everything in exactly the same way. That doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity, flexibility, and people questioning. And it doesn't encourage people to question.
Hmm.
If something doesn't look right, there'll often be an assumption that, well, okay, they're more senior to me, so I can't question that. Um, that can stifle that curious culture that that encourages that psychological safety, but most importantly, it allows problems to be solved and performance to improve, because you'll work together to iron out where there are issues rather than just accept that that's the way it has to be because that's the way it's always been, or that's the way we're told to do it.
Sure. And for our American audience, NSH is
Sorry,
National Health System.
National Health Service. Yeah,
National Health Service, and yeah, and everything that you have to say, a very, very large governmental environment. So yeah, very difficult to get your innovative and creativity juices flowing in that environment. So great, terrific. Rich, question.
Yeah, this one, why, I read your material that you had sent, and I was saying to Herb, I guarantee after listening to you talk for 5 minutes, I'm not going to care about the questions I came up with because just from what you were saying, it would generate a million questions, and what you were saying is so interesting. I guess the two things I sort of wanted to clarify. One is, to what extent the way you're describing, what is it called? The
NHS. Yeah, National
NHS,
Health
that's right. Yeah,
Service.
National
Yeah,
Health. The
yeah,
NHS. That's fascinating about the NHS's bureaucracies being set up on a military sort of, or at least being
yeah,
erected on a military foundation, I guess, the culture. But I'm wondering how different that really is from American corporate culture, or American healthcare.
yeah,
And if it's pretty much the same wherever you go. And if that's the case, I would imagine a lot of what you do is come up with strategies for people to make their own space somehow, to
mm,
and own their participation in that because I gather what people, there's a lot of people, a big sense of people's I don't know, lives and creativity being tightly controlled in that environment.
yes, yeah. And what tends to happen is you'll get teams within, and also I should say that the NHS is massive.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so it's broken down into foundation trusts
Mm.
or hospital trusts, and they are all run independently, but they're governed by the National Health Service, which is a central organisation, government linked. And so what will happen is, because you've got thousands of people employed by this NHS Foundation Trust, is you'll end up with lots of subcultures, because cultures come from
Hmm.
people, don't they, and
That's
behaviours, and
yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and what I can do, what I have done in the past, is I have developed subcultures, because that was the extent of my influence. But what I'm really keen to try and do through my coaching practice is develop the organizational culture, so that it actually fits with what it says it is.
Yeah.
Um, what often happens is they'll come up with a list of values, and they'll come up and they're all espoused beliefs. But when you actually look at what happens on the ground and how people behave and how people feel, it does not align with what they're saying. So it would be very nice to to not just influence subcultures, but really get underneath the skin of an organizational culture, and hold the leadership responsible, accountable to exhibiting those same behaviors, because that's often what doesn't happen. Is
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
write their values, they write their beliefs, and how the culture should be, and then they sort of issue it to the workforce and say, there you are, that's how you need to behave. Don't
Yeah.
look at us. We might be doing something completely
Yeah.
different.
And do you find that's a lot different, or all different from, say, American healthcare, or insofar as you know, or American corporate culture, for
Yeah,
instance?
I don't know a lot about American corporate culture, so but I'd,
Mm.
I'd be interested to know what Herb thinks, because
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
you've seen both sides,
Yeah.
Herb.
Yeah. 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 I think you find that there are some organizations that have designed their mission and their vision, and they've been able to create a strategy to make sure that they execute it that way. And the history of American companies is that they've done a very good job of that, where you've
Mm,
got McDonald's, whether you've got, in a more modern way, you've got Facebook and Uber. You've got these organizations that clearly make sure that their level of mission and vision is executed well. The problem is many years down the road, once they are successful, and now suddenly you're taking away from the mission of what they are
yeah,
espousing, right? And then it's all about money. And so suddenly, when you start cutting back and you start cutting away at your service, at the quality of your product, that's where you lose that. And I would imagine in the National Health Service, same kind of things happen. I think every manager, every leader, every employee wants to do a great job.
they do.
The problem is when you start pulling back money, you start moving it to a different environment. There's not enough resources. Maybe people haven't been trained because of the resources to train individuals, and all of that waters down. So when you look at a document and it says this is our mission, this is our vision, this is what we believe, you cannot meet that obligation because you don't have the resources to meet it, right? And I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
somehow, even if you don't have the resources, I think part of what I think you're able to do is to bring the individuals together, put teams together so that they can, even with limited resources, you still might be able to achieve operational goals and
yeah,
objectives that are needed, right?
yeah. Prioritizing and focusing in on what you've jointly agreed could be your priority, rather than having lots of sometimes conflicting priorities coming from different parts of the organization. Um, and yeah, you're absolutely right. When I've seen this firsthand, that you end up in an environment, because it's under so much pressure, that everyone gets competitive rather than creative, and
Yeah.
they start um, criticizing other departments, um, and and feeling aggrieved that, this department has got this money to do that when they think their need is greater. And so you end up with this very combative environment and that's divisive, isn't it? Because then people aren't pulling together to sort out the main issue, which is, meeting the health needs of their general population. They end up being very departmentally focused.
I'm sorry.
And
Why is that? What about that system engenders this competitiveness and
I think
trust?
it's as Herb was saying, I think it's just the lack of resources. So
Hmm,
as the money is squeezed, because it's all funded via the government and taxes,
hmm,
um, because we don't have uh, private healthcare insurance.
yeah.
I mean, you can, but that's a choice. Uh, so every year on year, it's getting tighter. The demand for health services is going up because our population is increasing. Um, the proportion of the general public that's paying the tax to fund the National Health Service is proportionally shrinking because we've
Hmm,
got older population and we've got a younger population coming through. So there's a lot of pressure on that middle band of working people to generate the funds to support the whole population. Um, and as a result, it again gets carved up into into the National Health Service. And ironically, NHS policy, I don't know if it still is, but it always was, that if you were the better performing foundation trusts, you got more money.
hmm,
Okay.
Sounds wrong,
hmm.
doesn't it?
Yeah,
Well,
So so
we do the
if you were
same, right? Yeah.
underperforming because you're struggling,
Hmm,
you would get less money. So it sort of exacerbated the problem. Um, and
and
yeah, and that I think that's what sets up then people they withdraw into their sphere of influence and decide that that's what they'll focus on. And then sometimes just lose sight of the longer term goal, which is to meet the needs of the public.
I can't when you brought that up, it kind of made me think about the fact that there's something similar with the school systems here where schools that are struggling, they don't get access to the funding they need.
Yeah.
It goes to the schools that are really successful and doing really well. And it just doesn't make sense when you think about it, because especially when the goal of this system is to create a good schooling environment for all children. That is what the
Yes.
goal is. Or I guess
Yes.
I that's what I'm assuming the goal is with it. So I think that's very interesting. It does feel like the environment is very conducive to that competitive nature. And I'm wondering, what ways have you kind of seen of kind of circumventing that in your work?
Um, it does start with working with the leadership of a trust and and properly strategically business planning. Um, that's another area that they're not terribly good at because it's funded annually. Um, they get a block funding based on various contracts that they are required to fulfill, and that funding gets recalculated every year. So frustratingly, when I was in my position, I would see a lot of sort of slippage build up through the course of a year, and that wouldn't be spent at the end of the year. It would have to go back to central, even though we'd spent a whole year saying we don't have enough money.
hmm,
It's sort of a bit weird. Um, if they were able to plan over a proper 5 year plan, for example, or 10 year plan, then they'd have um, a much better improvement trajectory because they could plan improvements over that time scale. So what happens as a result of annual recalculating and planning is that you only ever try to implement things that will show results within 12 months.
Yeah.
And as we know, transformative change doesn't happen in 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right.
So that's one of the other issues that we face in the health service. Um, but you're right. It's founded on equitable access. So we're trying to create a service that is equitable across the country, and yet we've created separate foundation trusts, and they get their funding based on performance. So that's not equitable, is it?
Mm-hmm.
So Vicky, when you've got individuals who have um, problems with their employer. They're not happy with going into work for
Mm,
for whatever reason. They're not satisfied. They might be stressed. They might be burnt out. There might be too much work.
yeah,
Whatever the environment is, and I know that you work with individuals that aren't just in this particular organization, but
no,
it's across different organizations.
yeah,
What are some of the first of all, what are you seeing? What are people telling you? Number one, that they're feeling, that they're seeing, or that they're stressed or anxious about in the workplace. What are those particular characteristics? And
yeah,
and then what are some of the things that you're able to help them with? And I think that again, I think you've created this first 20-25 minutes has been terrific to give individuals a very good understanding of what can happen in any one of their organizations.
yes,
These characteristics that you've just shared with us can be in any organization. Now,
yeah.
what can what can one do, and how do you help them with that?
Yeah, so I see people from across the public sector really. I've also worked in education, so I see a lot of people, a lot of teachers who are experiencing similar, where it tends to start with they just lose the joy in their job. And this is a job that they felt passionately about, making a difference to young people, educating people or helping people with their health. Um, they're the sorts of jobs you don't go into lightly, and they've many of them have been doing it for years, and they suddenly, well, it's not sudden actually, it's sort of insidious that they find that they no longer enjoy it, and they're not sure why. So I will, and that can become depression, um, and burnout. So so what I try to do is work with those people to identify and notice why they may have lost the joy in their job. Um, and it usually comes from that just a sense of overwhelm that they can't keep up. They, no matter what, no matter how many hours they put in the week, they don't feel like they're on top of their work. And that level of overwhelm, and particularly when it's over a sustained period, it actually causes a fear response in people, and they're not aware of that. So they freeze, or they fight it, or they run away. Um, and and what I try to do is work with them to first of all understand that that fear response is entirely normal. It's a neurological response who feeling overwhelmed, which is basically feeling threatened. You're feeling threatened because you're overwhelmed with work, and that they are instinctively reacting to that. And then what we'll do is we'll work to identify what has caused that overwhelm, and really break that down to where that no longer aligns with their core purpose and their desire to do the work that they do. Um, and that's where ikigai comes in. I love ikigai, which basically means it's Japanese for life's worth.
Mhm.
And it's a really useful model actually for working with people to identify where their passion is, what their mission is, what their vocation is, what their profession is, and seeing where there's any misalignment, and then working on those particular aspects to realign them. And then you can apply that to so you apply it to the job that they're doing, and then you can also apply it to the environment that they're in, to the organization. And sometimes it's not the job that they have an issue with, it's the organization that they're in that they actually have an issue with. And then we can set goals and we can work to re-establish some healthy barriers. And they can, if necessary, they have to start working outside of the organizational culture. If it's not a healthy culture for them, they have to start working outside of it, but be explicit about their new barriers.
Yeah. Good, good. Alisha.
I thought it was really interesting you brought up boundaries for work because I was kind of thinking about that. That was one of the things that I was getting a little bit overwhelmed trying because part of my job is directly helping small business owners, and
Mm,
starting up a business is a really hard time. I mean, you're in different places of your life, and this is something that someone will be very passionate about, but there's a lot of barriers in that way. So one of the things that I've kind of started thinking about is how can I kind of put boundaries on how much I can provide help wise.
mm,
But it does, I really resonate with the idea of having a passion, but the systems around you are not conducive for you to, I guess, accomplish what your passion is uh,
mm.
in a meaningful way. So I found that very interesting. And Ikigai, I would love to learn more about that because
Yeah,
I've
that's
never
great.
heard of that.
It looks like Rich has heard. Rich, have you heard of Vicky Guy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
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 It,
Fascinating.
it's it's a really useful tool. I mean, it's not the be all and end all, but it's a really useful tool, and I most clients I work with really respond to it because it helps break down what they've taken for granted or is just what they thought is them. Um, it gives them
Can
a
I just,
framework to
I'm
work
sorry.
within.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just, these things are just occurring to me as you talk. I'm just curious. So when you're approaching these problems, you're working with individuals primarily or are organizations involved? Because I'm wondering, you can approach these problems, right, almost from two perspectives, right? Like,
Absolutely.
how do you get the individual to sort of fit into the corporate culture that they're having a problem with? Or you can look at it from a more sociological, I guess, perspective as how can we do what we can to change the corporate culture that's
Yeah.
causing perhaps the problems that individuals are facing.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's what I really want to do more of, Richard.
mm,
And I haven't got to that stage yet. So most of my work thus far has been with individuals.
yeah.
But it is teaching me a lot about the organizational cultures that they're working in. And I can see that there is incongruence there.
Mm,
And so that's why I have developed a, a sort of in-depth corporate culture consultancy program
mm,
that 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 if organizations were to contract with me, I would go in and do a proper sort of psychological safety assessment. I would assess their culture through culture mapping,
wow,
um, and see how that aligns with the um, the purpose and values of their workforce generally, because I think that's where we've got issues, and I think it's. I'm also interested to know to what extent the size of the organization is
mm,
having a negative impact on that. Because I have worked for a health charity that was relatively small, um, and again, that sort of inspired me to go into this work, because they seemed to have really embraced that work-life balance and well-being, developing a workforce that supports their well-being and enables them to thrive and flourish and do their jobs to the best of their ability. As a result, they don't have any retention issues, really. They don't, their sickness issues are you know, are
Yeah.
minimal. And they've worked it out, really. They've worked out that if you look after your staff, they will look after you. And they lived by their values.
That's
And
interesting.
all the directors, the CEO, they all um, they all exemplified their values. And I was working for them when COVID hit and we went into lockdown in this country, and I was managing a team of managers um, who I had to try and manage virtually and retain them as a team, even though some were going on furlough and some weren't, and it could have all gone very wrong. But the CEO at the time was fantastic, because they would have a organization wide um, Zoom call with all of the workforce, and he would give everyone permission to take time out of away from their desks, go into their garden, play with their dog, kick a football around with their kids. He gave everyone permission to do that, and as a result, um, people looked after themselves, and they didn't feel guilty if they felt they needed to do that, and people worked very hard.
I bet. Yeah. It's
So
interesting. Well, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was I that was an example of it
Yeah.
working, and I'm so
Yeah.
pleased that I got the opportunity to see an organization
Mm.
manage culture and well-being so well.
Yeah, it just because I was just going to say it's been such a persistent theme in everything I've talked to Herb, of course, and Alicia. In so many of these, I guess you guys would agree, right? In so many of these shows we've done that are pertinent to what you do, that the nature of corporate culture seems to have a lot to do with whether or not. I mean, I've been a philosopher. I've done a lot of work on. Once famously said, I've seen this on bumper stickers and things like that. It's no measure of a person's sanity to be able to fit well into an insane society.
Yeah,
And I mean, right, you could
absolutely.
say the same thing about, I mean, so much of what Herb has said to me over the years sort of indicates that about corporate culture. He blames so many of the trends you're seeing, like, right, what would they used to call it? What, quiet quitting? Was that what it was, guys?
Yeah,
And things like that. I'm not on so much on the nature of the worker changing, the psychology of the worker changing,
yeah,
force, but on the corporate culture that engenders this kind of psychology.
yeah,
So I don't know what you
yeah.
guys think about that.
I think it was interesting you brought up, sorry, Dr. Ricardo,
Go ahead, go
COVID and how that CEO kind of reacted. Have you seen more of that since COVID, or do you think that kind of, because that feels like that mindset is rare, if I'm going to be honest.
Their reaction as an organization to COVID and lockdown was remarkable. It was so um, broad-minded and compassionate. And I didn't see it. So a year later, I then went to work for the NHS again, and the NHS was completely the opposite. Cold, matter of fact. Everyone's working from home, and there were no mechanisms, or there was no support in place to help managers navigate that really unusual situation. Whereas that organisation, it was Alzheimer's Research UK, is a charity, and it was that organisation that just exemplified really living by their values and looking after their staff. And they just put practical things in place. They enabled everyone to work from home for a start. They allowed they found ways around the issues of uh, digital issues around holding events online, virtual events, all those sorts of things, because they still needed to do their work, still needed to raise funds. Um, and so they really embraced any creativity. And it just highlights what can be done when you've got an organizational culture is aligned to its workforce. But it's a very interesting uh, dynamic, because what I'd say is in the NHS and the larger organizations is the onus on individual well-being is on the individual.
Mm.
And it's like the organization is always saying to the individual, you need to look after yourself. It
Mm.
doesn't seem to take any responsibility for supporting them in that and giving them those permissions. It's so important, isn't it? That message from the CEO when he said, and he said himself, yesterday I just couldn't sit in front of my desk anymore. So I got up, I went outside, and it's a beautiful day, and I kicked a football around with my son for an hour. And he, because he said that, everyone sort of went, oh, thank goodness.
Mm.
It's not just me.
Vicky, boy, you talk about so much about the modern workplace. So many organizations have deadlines, levels of productivity. The environment may not necessarily be conducive, and often it's not, to
No.
healthy living, to the way that the body is. Like I'll sit at my desk for 6 hours straight, entering emails and formulating documents and sending that is not that my body's not designed for that. I need to be going out
No.
kicking the football and doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But the point though is we all have to go to work. We've got to go to
Yes.
work, and we don't have that option to say, you know what, this company doesn't fit my lifestyle. I'm going to go off and find another job
Absolutely.
someplace. I'm going to go to the Andes, and that's where I want to be. Or I'm going to go, to Jamaica and be in that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to get on the train, you're going to get on the bus, you're going to get into the car, you're going to sit in traffic for 2 hours, and you're going to go to work. And so
Yeah.
the question is what can one do? The fact that they create the system in their mind, whether or not they're going to prison or not. And the reason why I say this, I'm not taking away the responsibility or the ownership from the CEO of the company, the division manager, or whoever that might be. But at the end of the day, they know a way of how and what they want to achieve. And we as employees are going to go into that organization. And I'm going to give one
Mm.
example, which was really interesting. I've had the fortune to be able to spend time at Disney, okay, in their training program. As a matter of fact, I went kind of literally underground, and I was able to many years ago with two different organizations study the management and marketing and culture of Disney. And what was interesting, they even allowed me to interview the employees without management around. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Mm.
And so one of the things what was really interesting is some employees thought it was the best place on earth and they would never leave. They thought it was great, celebrating Mickey Mouse's birthday as a national holiday. They thought that was absolutely wonderful. And then the other side, there were people who were coming into work. They said, this is a cult. They control you. It's Big Brother is watching you and everything else. And that has really formulated a lot of the way that I think about not only employees, but organizations. And kind of going back to the question that I'd mentioned at the beginning was, there's part of the responsibility of the organization is
Yeah,
to make sure that they hire people whose
it is.
values align with them. And then
Yes.
also from the perspective of the employee going to work for or applying for jobs, right, that align with their values. And
Yeah.
something happens in between where both sides, I need a warm body. I need an employee. I just need somebody. We've got to hire someone. And then then the employee, I just need a job. I got to pay for my car. I've got to pay for my food, right? And I mean, I love what you do. I love the coaching. I love that you spend time with individuals because, and of course, I love the idea that you want to be in the organizations and the ones that will embrace you. Hopefully, there'll be this kind of marriage between the two where you'll have an opportunity to spend time with the employees individually, and you'll have a chance to be spending time with management and leadership and strategic planning on how to create a value working environment so that ultimately productivity happens, right? Is that
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. So it all boils down to productivity, which is what the organization wants. The organization wants employees that are going to do a really good job and be highly productive in those jobs. Um, and actually, that's what employees want to do as well. Most of them is they want to do a really good job and be highly productive. And what I see happen is that there's this sort of drift um, where people start to feel under pressure, so they think productivity is time spent, um, and and productivity is getting stuff done, um, and the organization isn't necessarily supporting that person to be efficient in their job by being clear about what the priorities are, being clear that they do not expect them to work 10-hour days. They do not expect them to sit at their desk all day long and not take any breaks. They need to be clear about those things rather than just let them happen. Because what happens then is that's when people start to just turn up for work and not at all productive. They're not efficient in what they do, and that spirals down into burnout invariably. But productivity, importantly, during that time has dropped off.
yeah,
So they're being really inefficient in their work, in their position.
yeah,
And so then the organization isn't achieving its aims either.
right, right, right.
I
And then
think
that's what that CEO of Alzheimer's Research UK knew. He knew that if everyone had permission to take as many breaks as they needed, they would be even more productive in the time when they were at work.
Yeah. Alicia?
So
so.
he wasn't going. Sorry, Alicia.
So you can continue.
No, I was just going to say so that he wasn't concerned about, when people started work, whether they'd clocked up the hours. He wasn't concerned about that. He's just concerned about people getting the work done in a way that kept them energized and operating at their best.
I definitely see this kind of conflict, and I think it's been brought up, like when Rich brought up quiet quitting and things. I think you're seeing with the younger generation of workers, and I'm actually interested in if you've actually seen this in your work, um, this kind of work-life balance and passion. Well, actually, one of the interesting things about it that now that I'm thinking about is I feel like it doesn't matter what generation, being passionate about your work and having all of these things is important. However, it seems like we are much more vocal, the younger generation, of these
Mm.
things. Do you see the
Hmm.
same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's also symptomatic. I don't know if I don't it's chicken and egg situation,
Mhm.
but I don't um younger people don't expect and don't stay in the same organization for years and years anymore. And like, you know, not necessarily my generation, but the generation before me, the expectation was you would go into a career and you would stay in it um, for many, many years, and you might stay with the same employer for many, many years. And so that was a different operating culture because there was a lot more loyalty and trust. And I think over the last 10 to 20 years, a lot of that loyalty, organizational loyalty, and trust for your organization has diminished because there's a lot more churn, and but in the public sector in particular, every 10 years there's a um, central government will reduce funding and they have to lay a load of people off, and make lots of redundancies. So that trust is no longer there.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that must have an impact on culture as well. So when you enter a new organization, your perspective may be one of, okay, so what am I going to get out of this job? Not so much what am I going to give to the job, but what am I going to get out of it? Because I don't trust that my employer is necessarily going to give me anything other than they're just thinking, what am I going to get out of my employee?
And Vicky, and let me just jump in right there. And
Yeah.
Alicia, help me out on this one because we're talking about your generation on this one. That is, and in that respect, I hear in the classroom where a lot of my students will say, you know, the employer doesn't care about me. They'll fire me at will at any time.
Mm,
So that question of what am I going to get out of there first is that first thought versus what am I going to give them? And there is no doubt that in my generation, uh, you just went to work and you were basically everybody in your environment, your friends or whatever, is it hard there? You have to work a lot, and of course, everybody did that. You did. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It was military in the sense of you gave everything that you had. You made sure that you were at work. And again, Alicia, help me out on this one. I'm not so sure that this generation feels that way. I think this generation, I'm not saying that they cannot do that. I'm just saying they don't trust to do that first. It's almost like you prove yourself to me, then I'll
mm,
start to give you more. Is that right,
I
Alicia?
think it's dead on. Like Vicky said, we've seen this kind of cyclical like cycle of companies just giving less and less. There's less trust because there's not an expectation that you'll still be there, that they will support you in that way. So there is the sense of just, I guess, buckling down and saying, this what can I get from this? And while I've seen it as like, monetarily wise, bouncing around to get, make sure that you're getting that pay raise. So you're uh by going around to other jobs and stuff, you're able to get more money and things like that. But I think it also changes to another direction where we're a lot more I think going back to those principles and those passions and working for something that we value, and the way we're providing that work is consistent. One of the things what Vicky said was this dichotomy where leadership is telling you one thing, this is how things are supposed to go, yet leadership is not doing it. Do as I say, not as I do, I think is the saying.
mm.
And it just does not work. Well, for my perspective, it just does not make sense.
No, and it creates again, it undermines trust, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Because when something is saying one thing and doing another, you just don't believe it.
Mhm.
And then how can you trust that thing to do right by you? Um, it's a yeah, it's I'm really fascinated by how younger people see the workplace now. Um, because obviously I've gone through a few decades of it being a little different. But yeah, it's interesting.
What do
Great
you think?
question.
What do you think?
One of the things
Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
was
Alicia. Go ahead.
one of the things that I also thought of when you were speaking originally is how younger people are very aware of those kind of dire straits. The way you were describing the National Health Service sounds very similar to maybe our Social Security system or
Mm,
different things that we just no longer have trust are going to
Mhm.
continue to be able to provide the service they can barely stay at the level they are now. So it does kind of breed this level of a dour outlook. So there's a
Mm.
lot more to that immediate, what can I get now, over looking to a future that is very, very up in the air.
Yeah, and we can become a bit defeatist, can't we, when we constantly refer back to how things have been, or how things are evidencing themselves now. And you can get into a mindset of, okay, well, that's how it is, and that sucks. And then it starts to undermine your motivation and love of your work. And I see that a lot in NHS staff who have just been defeated by the system, and the feeling that they, doesn't matter how hard they work, it doesn't make a difference to the outcomes, because they're in rough seas. um, and that's another facet to developing organizational culture. It's really hard to do when they're fighting fires. It's really hard to find the time to get to stop and take stock, isn't it? When you've got this level of urgency constantly, um, at your door, and it's very difficult, and it's very difficult then to focus on the well-being of your staff
Sure. Yeah.
when you're actually just looking at your finances and your KPIs and your, the number of patients that you've actually seen, and the number of patients that's sitting on waiting lists.
Rich, what kind of philosophical thought can we infuse in our minds on a daily basis when we're in the workplace and we're trying to find our Zen environment between our ears? And as Vicky just mentioned, KPIs are flying, and you're dodging the KPIs that you're having to meet and the objectives.
Yeah, I don't know. I defer to you guys. You're the workplace psychology gurus. And the way Vicky's describing the healthcare system there, and the way we've talked over the last, gosh, decade, right? All you hear anymore is about a healthcare crisis in the United States, and that's among workers, right? They talk about nursing crises and burnout and all that kind of stuff. I'd say stoic resignation is a good prescription for one thing. But in terms of finding peace within the noise, as in a kind of Zen contentment. Gosh, I don't know. What do you guys think? It's really one of the essential questions I had that I think I sort of sent and I never got to ask, because we've had so many other interesting venues this discussion has taken. But I'd be curious to know, what do you think, Vicky? What are the sort of, if there are any universal sort of worldview, orientation, values, psychological issues that you find that people are really essentially trying to confront in the workplace, and what you prescribe for that? What do you think?
Um, I think I think we can sometimes refer too much to history, and that can stifle our creativity and our belief in what's possible. And I firmly believe that anything is possible, actually,
Yeah,
if we can get together on it, and we can um, build a team,
yeah.
a guiding coalition, if you like, around an idea. We
For,
can make it happen. And I
for,
do,
I'm sorry.
sorry, I think we're inclined sometimes to just accept history as fact, and that's how it will be forever. And I don't subscribe to that.
for like an individual worker, because I faced this my whole life. I was never really enthusiastic worker. So I'd go in every day, in institutions that I largely felt sort of a quasi alienated from, and I didn't love my boss, and I might have been really interested in what I was doing, but I was really disillusioned with how it was being done and how my time was being organized and things like that. What do you tell people then? How do you I think that's what Herb was getting at. How do you cope with that in a
what you're
satisfying
describing is that reference point of that's how my job is, and I don't like it. What I would do with that person is say, what would good look like? What does happy look like? So let's compare the two. What's different? And then how do we move from A to B?
Great. Alisha, any wrapping up kind of questions for Vicky?
So I think one of the things that I really resonated with is your passion for not only helping people kind of come to their own passion, but this kind of hope in the way that people interact, or not even hope, it's just like this knowledge that together we are capable of great things. I think it's really important, because it is very much, it's kind of like what Dr. Ricardo was saying about mindset. It's not what can we do, it is what are we looking at, like what does a better situation look like? And that can be really hard when you're set in the ways of what's around you. But I think that hope is very important for people, and getting them going, getting them motivated.
Yeah. And having a really clear idea of what good or better looks like, breaking it down. So Rich, when you were saying, I don't like my boss, I don't like my working environment, I don't like this, what I would do with that individual is I'd say, what is it? What would a good boss look like? What would a good working environment look like? What would good hours be? What would, and then you've got something concrete to work with.
Yeah.
And then work on moving closer to that end point. But you're creating a vision and focusing on a more positive picture rather than going into work every day and being reminded of the picture that you don't want.
Yeah. That's excellent.
Yeah, Vicky, I mean, right on target. Let me tell you something. There's a replacement there for Stephen Covey. Vicky Russ is going to take over for the next level of understanding our culture and individuals. And of course, what have I learned? I've learned that I'm going to leave here in a few minutes and go out and play football. I'm going to go ahead and take my football out and kick it around and
take a break.
And I will be happy, because I remember with David, I loved playing football as much as we could possibly do. So that was absolutely wonderful time. Well, again, Vicky, thank you so much. This was terrific.
Thank you.
My goodness, I feel like we could spend the whole entire day. And this is stuff that I truly love. And again, Alisha and I have talked about this, Rich and I, and of course, weekly, we bring a lot of this content into what we're discussing and everything else. So absolutely great. And I hope you'll come back, and
I'd love to.
And we'll have more conversation about
this. Great.
So
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the
wonderful.
opportunity, and it's been lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.
Great, super. Okay, well, again, we've burned up an hour of your life, and so if you like what you see, certainly join us again. Hit that subscribe, and we will see you next week. So until then, everyone, take care. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to next week as we cover another cool and fun topic. This podcast was produced by Three Lions Production and sponsored by Consulting and Training. Until next time, keep it between the lines.